What's up, everybody? It's Emorja, and we are back for an episode of Black at ND, and I have my co-host here, Miss Lynette.wukie. How are you doing?
Good. Glad to be back. So excited for today's episode.
Yeah, me too, because we have Professor McKenna with Africana from the Africana Studies Department. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thrilled to be here and excited for the invitation.
Yeah, and listen, she's a trooper because she's multitasking, even as we're on this call. So I love it. I love it. I guess a mom's job is never done.
No, you're doing what you got to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to sort of ask, so with you being who you are in the Department of Africana Studies, what is your role?
So I'll back up a little bit and talk a little bit about my role from the very beginning, because I think it's actually important to the story of how I get to where I am. If you would have asked me when I was 20 or 18 or 22, when I was graduating from Notre Dame, if I knew what Africana Studies was, or I knew what you did in that department, I would have been like, no, I don't have any idea. And I fancied myself as pretty thoughtful and pretty engaged and working hard to understand the world. But my 20-year-old self didn't even know that ethnic studies was really a discipline or a space that anybody could be in.
Yeah.
And when my family came here for my husband's job, I started working at the department as an administrative assistant for a pre-doctoral program for Black graduate students who were finishing their PhDs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I worked in administration, and I really was the enormous beneficiary of all of these young men and women who were coming to Notre Dame to finish their own PhDs.
Yeah.
And their only job was to come and write their dissertations. And so for the first 2 years that I was here, I was finishing my own dissertation while I was doing this administrative work. But I really got to be surrounded by some of the most talented African-American individuals in the country who were up and coming academics, and got exposed to a wide variety of topics, of fields, of ways of thinking that really sort of steered me to where I got today. And ultimately, I started doing some course planning and some teaching, and ended up as the director of undergraduate studies for the department after finishing my PhD.
Wow.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, and so I had no idea. So let me ask you, because you just added something else to the question list I had in mind. What made you want to particularly work with Black students as a white woman? What drew you?
So I think that there are a couple of things about this. The first is that I recognized pretty quickly, even as an undergraduate, but especially as an adult, that I had a lot of privilege that other people didn't have.
Yes, ma'am.
It was easier for me to walk through the world in all kinds of ways because of my whiteness. And that was doubly true when I came back to Notre Dame as an employee. I had this sort of lore and history and all of the culture and rah-rah Notre Dame pieces already down. Yeah. So I knew how to navigate this space in a way that for a lot of people is really not an easy space to navigate. And so it really quickly became clear to me that one of the gifts that I did have to offer was to use up some of that privilege to make this space a little bit more welcoming, a little bit easier, a little bit more accessible for all kinds of people, and especially kids of color, frankly, because this place, like most predominantly white institutions, can be a really hard place to be a person of color.
Yeah. Wow. That's intense. Wow. And it's funny you even mentioned that, and you said it so easily, and a lot of people don't admit that there is privilege. Sometimes people still have this idea that it does not exist, even after there has been evidence that shows that it in fact does exist. I was recently looking at something from the South Bend racial wealth gap, and it was dealing with Blacks, Latinos, Asian Americans, and then also whites. And there's so much, the gap is, you can't deny that there is privilege there with housing, with resources. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. And right now we have this whole idea where everybody is, an ally. First of all, what is an ally, and how can whites become ally at a critical time like this?
Oh, there's so much to this question, and I don't know that I have all of the answers or even part of the answers, but I do know that what it takes to be an ally is to work at it and to keep working at it, even when you think, oh, I got this, or I figured this out, or I know what I'm doing, or yep. I was listening to Austin Channing, who the Cloud Center had last week, talking about her writing and her work, and she said it so beautifully that I'm gonna use her words here. She said, it's much more important as an ally to be brave than it is to be kind. That kindness is making sure someone's okay after you witnessed a microaggression, or kindness is making sure that you're out front talking about, don't wear that for Halloween, or don't use that joke or that language. But brave is really trying to talk to people, to educate them, and to be willing to get it wrong. So I think for me, the most important thing about being an ally is to recognize from the very beginning, those of us who are not people of color are never truly going to understand what it's like to walk in a Black or a brown person's body. We just can't. And if we start from that premise and we say, even though we can't do that, we are going to do our absolute best to make sure that we are learning and thinking about the way we walk through the world critically and thoughtfully, and making sure that everywhere we go, that everyone belongs at the table, and everyone belongs in the room, and everyone has the resources and the support they need to be successful at those tables or in those rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of touch on and bring in something different, you kind of mentioned when, like, being brave in these situations is also calling people out on the things that they're saying as they're happening, and protecting your fellow people of color. And something I feel like you hear a lot, and I have heard a lot, and a phrase that I've kind of struggled with is when people say, I don't see color. And you could kind of explain what that means. Also, react to
it. So we are in a moment in time where the politics of politeness and of respectability have overshadowed what I think is real, honest dialogue and engagement. And for many people, their version of I'm trying to be thoughtful and be anti-racist even is to say I don't see color. The problem with that is that when you say you don't see color, what you are also saying, whether you mean to or not, is I don't see the systemic discrimination, the systemic challenges, the systemic disenfranchisement, and the systemic buildup of wealth by white America or whiteness, globally. That impacts people every single day. And so by saying you don't see whiteness, you are disavowing a very, very long history of exclusion and of marginalization that you can't disavow and be an ally. You have to be willing to say, not only do I see color, but I'm going to be brave enough to say, I may not always understand what that means, but I'm committed to learning. I'm committed to listening, and I'm committed to staying the course. And I'm not just gonna be a one and done. I'm your friend, or I took this one class, or I saw you play whatever sport you play, and and feed into those stereotypes of this is enough to do those things are enough, as opposed to really say, I see you in your fullest self. Yeah. I see all of you, not just you, Emorja, as a Black man, but I see you as a man. Yeah. I see you as an artist. I see you as a gift giver in terms of your spirituality. I see you in all of your fullness.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is like a great conversation so far. And I was also wondering, since, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit too, since you are a white woman, since, like you said, you could never truly understand the experience of like a BIPOC person, what do you think has been some of the most important things you've learned studying Africana studies, studying about specifically urban school environments for your career?
So I think that one of the most important things that I've learned is that I grew up in a world not that was colorblind, but that had equally as much of a problematic position, in that I read and watched and saw and heard about people of color in a deficit-laden narrative. Mm. And the most important thing that I've learned as an adult is that I needed to completely reframe how I understood what it meant to be a person of color. I needed to understand the richness and the fullness of neighborhoods. I needed to understand the richness and the fullness of deep, multi-generational family connections. I needed to come to appreciate the complexity of African-American vernacular or other ways of speaking. Yeah. I needed to come and appreciate the deep well of resilience and reservoir of history that people of color often carry with them. And so I think that the most important thing that I've learned, being a faculty member in Africana Studies, but also in my own education prior to that, was to really reframe my narratives and my understandings of the world in a way that saw the assets, the possibilities, and the challenges within different communities.
So how, in learning all those things, just to kind of bring it back to Notre Dame, how do you think in learning those super valuable things, how does that reflect in your work here at Notre Dame and in your day-to-day career?
So I think it reflects in a couple of ways, and I'm sorry that the lighting is kind of funky. Everybody who's watching and listening, it is what it is when you're in your car. I think that the way that has translated for me at Notre Dame is, first of all, to be really appreciative and thoughtful about the stories that people come with. Yeah. Right. And to ask them, tell me where you're from. Tell me about your family. Tell me what you love. And that has made all the difference in the world, because until you ask someone for their story and you genuinely take the time to listen, you haven't given yourself the opportunity to know them fully.
That's a word right there. Yeah.
And so there are days when I go home and I think, what did I do today?
Yeah.
What did I do? And the answer is, I had 2 or 4 or 7 kids in my office, students in my office, not kids. And I tried to listen deeply. I think the other thing that all of that has taught me to learn is to look critically, lovingly critically, at Notre Dame. You know, how can I be both a person who loves this place dearly and wants it to be better and expects it to be better and is part of the ways that it will get better?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that as someone who is not only a representative of the university, but also does things like this. I think that is one of the hardest parts about being an ambassador for the university is loving this place, but also specifically and purposely choosing not to ignore its flaws, but instead to act upon those flaws and try to make them better and do what you can to shine light on them so we can make it a better place. Because I mean, I love Notre Dame, but we got work to do for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's two really important things to point out. The first is that there's a lot of spaces in the world where we got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely.
In lots of K-12 school buildings, in lots of the business world, in advertisement, in product marketing, in so many places, in higher ed. And when you think about when you love your family and you love the people close to you, what you do is work always to help them be the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's how I think about this too, right? Is we're all collectively working to be the best version of ourselves. And if I didn't believe in the people, both the people who work here and study here, if I didn't believe that the people really meant that, it would be much harder to do.
Yeah. I agree. So true. That is so true. And the funny thing about it is, if we really take the time to think about this thing, the civil rights movement was not that long ago, less than 100 years ago. And, you know, yeah, exactly. And it really feels like now we're on the second leg of the civil rights era. We just called it the Black Lives Matter era. And, you know, with this, there are so many people who are, you know, they have the ally pins, they have the shirts, they have the hats. And this is where sometimes I have conflict because the allyship now is so popular. I wonder if people are doing it because it's a trending thing or if they really are in support of Black lives. And my question is, I don't know if there's even an answer for this, but how can someone be an ally and avoid joining just because it's popular?
Yeah, so tokenism is real, right? It's the thing to do or the thing to say. But what I would say to folks is that what I really hope is that we have listened and learned from the history that has come before us. I don't know if you all were lucky enough to hear Diane Nash last year when she came.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She's been here a couple of times, and it's been such a gift because every time she has spoken, the thing that has stuck with me, particularly as a white woman, is all of the ways in which throughout the civil rights movement, things were very carefully orchestrated. They were very clearly mapped out. And the allyship was one of deep action and forethought. So it's not enough to put a pin on your backpack. I'm grateful for the pins on your backpack because I know where you stand, right? Yeah. But if you come to me and say, well, there's a march downtown at Hunt Plaza about this, I'm going to say, okay, tell me more about the march. Tell me who's organizing it. Tell me what their platform is. Tell me what they're doing tomorrow when the march is over.
Thank you, because that's the truth. Because now that there's no one who is, you know, being publicized on the news as a recent death, you know, you see like on social media, you don't see too many Black Lives Matter hashtags as much. It's all calmed down.
That's right. And so we have to think about, what does it mean to be conspiratorial? People are using this word, sort of a co-conspirator or an accomplice.
Yeah.
And I think that this is an interesting controversy. Some people don't like that word because it designates itself as you're an accomplice in a criminal endeavor or a criminal activity. I don't know what I think about the word accomplice or co-conspirator yet, because I'm sensitive, especially to the notion of carceral ideas around anything related to people of color. But I do think that there is more to being an ally than just sort of waving the flag and saying, here I am.
Yeah.
Right. There are moments when you really have to throw down and be willing to give something up.
Yeah.
In the service of something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is something we talk a lot about too. As a media scholar, the difference between performative representation and actual representation. Putting one Black character in your sitcom with 10 white people that's not enough. That's not change. That's performative. And I think that that is true here at Notre Dame too. It's not enough to say, oh, we're going to admit more Black students. We need to make a safer and just more enjoyable environment for Black and Indigenous people of color. And I think that the work you're doing in Africana studies is so important because it gives kids a chance, even though we talked about it's not enough to take the class, but that's the first step.
Exactly.
It gives people a chance to access this information that's not always readily available. So I think that's awesome. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I want to be really clear, I'm the only white woman in Africana studies, but I am I'm not the person carrying that heavy load. Yeah. The scholars of color around me who have been doing this for decades and who welcomed me in and said, please join us. They need to be at the forefront and need to be the people that we are holding up and saying, these people have been fighting for this discipline to even exist for all of their lives. And I'm the lucky beneficiary of that. And I don't ever take that for granted, that those individuals around me who have been in the academy, who are people of color that I work with, have had to do so many more things to get to where they were than I ever did. And they have done it with a gracefulness that is sort of beauty personified when you're with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. Professor McKenna, almost made me cry. Yeah, so I really appreciate you coming on today because there are so many people who don't have the courage to say what you said and boldly say it. So thank you for being that person that we can come to, who does not look like us, but who's also in the fight with us for equal opportunity. But before we go, I first want to ask you, how did Julia, I'm taking for a turn, how did Julia end up singing gospel? And she can sing gospel, but how did this happen?
So Julia's my daughter, who's a sophomore and at Notre Dame. And the honest truth is, one of the things that I learned really early on about being an ally and being a person who really walks the walk is that you show up over and over again to events, to spaces where you are invited, and that you can say, I'm here because I was invited and it's valuable and I love you as people. And so Julia was 7 years old when we came to Notre Dame, and since she was 7 years old, she's been watching Voices of Faith perform.
Okay.
She's been seeing First Class Steppers dance.
Yeah.
She's been in the mix of the MSPS picnics because I was carting kids with me at 4:00 when the school doors were closed. And, I was a mom and a professor. And so that immersion, I mean, this goes back to that very first thing that we talked about, really about, how do you make sure that color blindness isn't the way that you raise someone or that you walk through the world. And my children were raised to see the beauty and the joy of particularly the Black spirit in ways that were real.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So that's how she ended up at Voices.
You grew up with it.
Literally, she was there before I was. That's so cool. So thank you so much, Professor McKenna, also known to me as Maria. I hopefully can see you on campus sometime soon. And Lynette and I were so appreciative for you joining the talk today.
I'm so grateful for the opportunity. You guys are doing amazing work, and the example that you're setting for young people all around us, the work that you are doing is pretty amazing. So thanks so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Yes. You have a good one.